Okay, so we are here today with host United Way and many of our community partners and friends to bring to you this third in our series, diversity series. And today we're going to be focusing on workplace bias, implicit bias, and prejudice. This is the beginning of this conversation in our workplace, or about our workplace issues relating to DEI. This is something that I know many of our groups are working on personally, as well as externally. So you might be doing a little bit of this work internally right now. You might be already moved to doing it externally. But at any rate, the national conversation around issues is still developing and it's going to be ongoing for a long time. So stay with us as we move through this. There'll be a survey in follow-up to today's session asking you, what types of sessions you'd like to see in the future, whether that's intimate conversations, facilitated conversations, tools, and tips, workshops. And so we'll send you that survey and follow up today. Please send that back to us. It will really help inform our work as we move forward. So thank you for being here. At this time, I would like to introduce you to Annette Johnson. She's our first presenter for today. She's the founder and principal of AJ Leads. I met Annette through her work at Salisbury University when she was on contract, as well as with some of our women's professional groups here locally. I've been able to experience some of Annette's presentations and hear her speak personally on important things that are happening in her own life during COVID. So I really enjoyed working with Annette, and we're excited to hear her present today. She is a global professional development facilitator and certified leadership coach. Along with Annette, you'll hear a little bit from Veronique Diriker, our resident chief strategy officer here at the foundation. We're really excited to have both Annette and Veronique with us today. And we'll turn it over with that. Thank you, Annette.
Thank you, Heather. And I am so grateful for the connections that I made when I was at Salisbury University. It's a place that will forever be near and dear to my heart. And I'm so happy to still be connected to the great people that I met while I had an opportunity to work there. And so thank you for inviting me to have this conversation today. And I couldn't think of a better person to share this conversation with than Veronique. And so I just want to start this conversation by asking people as we go through the next 40 minutes or so to think about overcoming workplace bias from the perspective of outcome and impact. And so think about how we as individuals, right, how we impact the spaces that we operate in, and how our behavior and our choices and our decision making and language affects the people that we interact with. And so I would just encourage people to think from that perspective as we go through the presentation. And I love, Heather, that you opened this up saying that this is ongoing, right? And still developing. And this is a conversation that should be ongoing and should continue to develop, because that's how we learn more about ourselves. We increase our own self-awareness, but it's also how we learn about others. And I think that's just such an important factor for the time and space that we're in right now. And so I'll start with just a short story, and then I'm going to ask Veronique to, share some comments as well, and then we'll dive right in. And I think often I have to challenge my own bias, right? And so as a Black woman, I don't get a pass. When I show up into spaces, and this happens a lot, more times than I wish it would, as the only woman sometimes at the table and the only Black woman at the table, I have to challenge my own biases and beliefs, right? And that self-talk that says, this is going to be a negative experience, or they're not going to listen to what I have to say, or they're not going to value my input. Right? So I have to challenge those. And that's what overcoming workplace bias is all about. That's how we overcome it. We challenge our own biases, we challenge our own belief systems and our own self-talk so that we can listen to understand and that we can be inclusive in our conversation and in our networking and our relationships with the people that we work with. And Veronique, you know, I want to give you an opportunity to share or make some comments before we dive in.
Sure. Thank you for that. Yeah, I wanted to share something with you. I have insomnia, as some of you know. And what I do, usually I go to Facebook or I go to YouTube or I do just really silly things to help me go back to sleep. And it doesn't usually work. And the other day I was thinking about this workshop and I did a soul searching and very difficult exercise. I decided to put in writing my own biases. And it was challenging to do that because I had to dig really deep inside me. But it was also something that I wanted to do in writing, because when it's in writing, then it becomes real and you hold yourself accountable to that much more than if it's just a passing thought. So it was soul searching, but the great thing about that is that my list, it was rather short, but it was still a list. I realized that there's nothing in there that I cannot overcome. I just have to work at it. And that was something that was uplifting for me in the middle of the night and that I wanted to share with you because it's very appropriate for what we're talking about today.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. And I love that term, soul searching. I think that's a great term. I'm gonna have to steal that because I think that's what this is all about. It's really about soul searching and, you know, looking inward, going inward and discovering who you are and asking some tough questions and seeing if you're showing up the way you want to show up. And if not, you know, you have an opportunity to change. So I want to start with a poll, and I want to read through the questions and then I'm going to ask Heather if she'll launch the poll. But in my training, I love to start with polls and self-awareness questions. I'm a certified professional coach, so I'm trained to ask lots of questions. And the questions are, have you examined your own personal biases? Do you seek perspectives of a diverse mix of people? Do you speak up on the value of diversity and inclusion? Do you speak out against bias, discrimination, and/or stereotypes? And so I'm going to ask Heather to launch the poll, and I'm going to ask everybody, these are yes or no questions. They're anonymous, so I don't know who answers to what. And it's not something that we're going to do a deep dive on, but I just think it's an important way to start these conversations. Looks like everybody is participating. So is this one question at a time, Heather, or are they all, it's one at a time, okay. So we can just, yeah, we can keep moving. So the first one is 79%.
They're one at a time, sorry about
Okay,
that.
so the
Here's
first one.
First one.
Yeah, the first one is 79% say yes, they have examined their own personal biases. We can go to the next one.
Okay. Here's the next one. Do you seek perspectives of a diverse mix of people?
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have 79% so far. Yep. Say all the time. So
Yep,
haven't
we'll
focused
that one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Same results. Same results.
Mm-hmm. And I like that, you know, people are being honest in their responses. Some people are saying, I'm not sure how to do this. And that's great.
And this one's, do you speak up on the value of diversity and inclusion?
Mm-hmm. Okay. 83% yes.
Yep. So we'll share that
And
one.
some people said no, and that's fine.
Mhm. And then the last one is also about speaking up against bias, discrimination, or stereotypes.
Mhm. Okay.
Interesting.
88% and a few people said no. So thank you everyone for participating in the poll and for your honest responses. So why do we do this? Why do we start from a place of self-awareness? Because in this space, the DE&I space, when we're talking about overcoming workplace bias, that's where we start. That's the most effective place to start. It's easy to say, you know what, it's leadership's responsibility, it's the board's responsibility, it's this person's responsibility, but we all have an opportunity to examine, right, how we're showing up and what our behavior is and what we're doing in this space and what we can do differently. And so I like to start from a place of self-awareness because it's in that self-examination that we can make change. We can make positive change, we can make sustainable change. And we become role models and leaders when we do that because other people are looking to us to see how we're acting, how we're responding, what we're doing. And so it's an opportunity for us to role model positive behavior for those who are around us. I want to shift a little bit to the survey results. Veronique shared some of the survey results that out of a survey that was conducted. So Veronique, can you just walk us through some of the findings from that survey?
Sure. This is a survey that the Community Foundation of the Eastern Shore, together with the United Way, put together in February to March. And we surveyed 300 local nonprofits from our 4-county area to find out the impact of COVID on our nonprofits, to assess our community needs and determine where priority funding should be put, as well as the level of DEI preparedness on the part of our nonprofit organizations. So that's what I wanted to go over with you quickly. 44% of our nonprofits, or those who responded, we had a 43% response rate, so that was really good, said that 10% of their board members are people of color. So that is not representative of our community, and I would imagine that it's not representative of most communities in this country. So that is something that I think we need to discuss as the nonprofit group at this point. We also found out that 46% of organizations reported actively implementing action steps towards DEI. So that's less than 0.5%. I mean, I'm sorry, that's less than 50%. And 53% of organizations reported having developed or are in the process of developing DEI policies. So that means that 47% of organizations are not. And that is problematic. We also asked open-ended questions with regards to diversity and DEI, and the responses indicated that there is a definite level of confusion about the term diversity and the term of people of color. I had comments in the survey that said, we don't need to be diverse to be fair. Or what is a person of color? What does that mean? So I think, you know, these are areas of education and learning that we need to stress, we need to work on. And also when we asked the training opportunities that would be most helpful to organizations, nonprofit organizations, development and fundraising is 1, board development is 2, and the third one was DEI. I think we had 7 choices altogether. And board development and DEI are actually very intertwined. So, you know, these results show that our nonprofit organizations need guidance, they need support, and that's why this type of workshop is extremely important for us as a nonprofit community to do.
Thank you for sharing that, and kudos for this work, because you know, surveys are very impactful, especially if you're going to listen to the information shared and use that as a part of your strategy development. And so I applaud any organization that takes the time to, you know, ask their constituent base what they think and feel, so that they can incorporate that feedback into their strategy work. So you mentioned people were confused a little bit about some of the terminology, and I find that to be very common. You know, even as a practitioner, I am in conversations where other practitioners talk about how sometimes it can be challenging to keep up with the right terminology. Nobody wants to offend anyone, and we all want to be informed, especially when we're doing this work. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of take a walk across this continuum of how terms have changed over the years. So when I first started in this space, it was diversity. I was doing diversity work, right? I worked for a Fortune 100 financial services firm. I was asked to be a part of a corporate faculty back in the early 90s, where we were certified as HR professionals. We were certified to deliver corporate-wide a diversity training program. And we talked a lot about diversity. We also talked about representation as it relates to diversity, right? So does our employee population mirror a percentage of the community in which we sit and we serve? And so diversity was about representation, making sure that people from different walks and backgrounds and races and ethnicity and gender were appropriately represented. And then we expanded that conversation to equity. Are we meeting people where they are? Right? Or are we examining what individuals need to succeed, or are we prescribing what we think they need to succeed? Because what works for me is not going to necessarily work for you, Veronique, or Heather, or Lili. You know, we have individual needs, and those individual needs will determine, you know, what is required for us to be able to succeed. And then even, you know, recently, inclusion has become a big word, right? And sometimes it's used diversity and inclusion, sometimes it's used inclusion and diversity. But inclusion is, you know, do the diverse people that we bring into our organization, do they feel included? Are they at the table for decision making? When we're talking about strategy work, product development, you know, policies, procedures, is everyone's voice being represented here? And then belonging, another big word, right? A human need. For those who remember Haslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Belonging, everybody wants to belong, whether it's to belong in their family, at work, in school, in the communities that they live in. We all have a high need to belong. And then now, given everything that's playing out in society around the injustices, justice has become a big part of the conversation for this work. And organizations are being looked to do the right thing, legally, morally, ethically, and to use their voice, their privilege, their power, their resources to stand up for what's right, and to do the justice work that needs to be done. So this is just to kind of level set and give a general overview of some of the DEIBJ terms that are being used today. And they're all interchangeable, right? If you look up the formal definition for each of these words, you're going to see a lot of overlap, and they all work together. And so in having this conversation, you have to talk about privilege, or it's important to talk about privilege. So Veronique's going to share high level what this graphic means in terms of privilege.
Thanks, Annette. Yes, we can't really talk about bias without being aware of our own privilege. And so this I think it was very well done. It was probably done by a Canadian person, because I see French speaking over there and Aboriginal areas. But I think it addresses many of the areas that we are familiar with. So the center of this image is privilege. The first circle around the privilege are the people that benefit from certain privileges by being either men or white or middle years, etc. And the further away from that circle you move, the more marginalized or vulnerable people are. For example, if you look at the 10 o'clock high, you see that white people certainly have more privilege than people that are not. If you look at about 5 or 6 o'clock, the able-bodied people are much closer to being privileged than people that have either chronic or temporary health issues, and certainly people that are living with disabilities. If you look at the 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, I've been all three. I have been a citizen, I have been a permanent resident, and I have been a nobody. I have been a no status person. I know that there is another immigrant person on this Zoom call, so I'm sure they can relate. But you know, when you're a no status, you're basically a nobody in legal terms, and that is very scary. You're extremely vulnerable. So this is just a wheel that we use for our training. Heather picked it up, and I think it's very well done, and addresses many of the areas that we wanted to address in those workshops that we've put together.
And this is an important part of the conversation, right? I just saw something on LinkedIn this morning, an article that was put out. And sometimes when you mention the word privilege, it's like a dirty word. You know, it has this negative connotation to it. But we have to start becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable in this conversation, right? And dig deeper and explore what are the benefits, right, of privilege, and how can they be used more broadly? And then what are the ways that it's not effective? How is it being abused? How is it not being used effectively? So we have to get comfortable having those conversations. You know, one of the most common types of training that's happening is the unconscious implicit bias training, right? So if you get hired today almost anywhere, especially in major companies, you're going to be required within the first 90 days to take a 30 to 45-minute web-based training on unconscious bias, right? It's a part of the compliance process for companies. And you may not remember the training 2 days later, but it's a training that's a requirement for most new hires in companies. And unconscious implicit bias are pretty much the same term. And what it gets at is our prejudices and judgments, which usually support one group over another, and they are usually unfair. Right? And so we all have them. When I do training, I ask people to raise their hand if they believe that they are not biased or they don't have any biases, right? We all have them. As a Black woman, I have biases, and I have to check those biases repeatedly because there are experiences that I've had that have shaped and formed my beliefs, and I have to check those. I have to make sure that I am not allowing those biases to show up in an unfair or a prejudiced way. The other part of that are stereotypes, right? And stereotypes where we overgeneralize about groups. You know, we take those beliefs and then we spread them broadly. You know, as any stereotype or experience that you've had with one Black person becomes your experience for all Black people, right? And so we have an opportunity to explore those stereotypes and check ourselves in terms of those stereotypes. There's a training that I do, and we do this extensive stereotype exercise where we put groups up on a flip chart. We cover the flip chart. We have maybe 3 to 5 people go up to that flip chart. And when they unveil the flip chart, it'll have a label. It could be African Americans, it could be females, it could be LGBTQ, it could be elderly. And we ask people to write down all of the things that society says are true about these groups. And part of the debrief of that exercise is to start with a blank slate. We have an opportunity in every interaction we have to start with a blank slate, right? Not bring our judgments, not bring those judgments from our unconscious biases and stereotypes into those interactions with people, but to show up in a way where we get to know them and allow them to show us who they are. So what's driving diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice today? There's so much happening in the world today around these topics, right? And so when we started years ago, and even now to a certain extent, we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice making good business sense, right? It's important for the bottom line business. I've been a part of conversations where, you know, chief diversity officers, practitioners are steering away from the bottom line conversation, right? And talking more and using language around it's the right thing to do. You know, it's about humanity. It's about civil rights. It's about justice. And so we're in a space, I believe, right now where we all have an opportunity to challenge what is driving our actions, our behavior, especially as organizations and businesses. What is motivating, inspiring, or driving us to do what we do, or what we're not doing, even more importantly, and look at it differently and challenge ourselves in terms of what is our strategy? Do we even have a strategy? You know, and if we don't have a strategy, why not? And if we do have a strategy, how are we living up to that strategy, the vision for our organization as it relates to diversity and inclusion? How are we living up to that vision? What action steps are in place? What are the goals and objectives that align to that? And are we living up to those? Are we fulfilling them? And are we including everyone in our organization to help drive that strategy? And so there's a great tool out there that it was developed by Meyer Memorial Trust. I don't work for this organization. I have no stake in this tool or the organization, but as I've been doing research around tools that are available, especially free tools, given the state of the economy these days and some of our financial challenges, this is a tool that I came across that I really appreciate. And it's the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Spectrum tool. And it's very simple to digest and to understand. And so there are these 5 categories that you can use as a benchmark for the work that you're doing in your organization. Not yet started, ready to start, launched, well on the way, or exemplary and leading. And so you can use those categories to look at some of the specific components of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how you measure up against that internally. And so some of those components are your DEI vision, your policies, diversity, decisions, commitment, your infrastructure, data, how you capture it and use it, accountability, leadership, training, community, and inclusion. And so those categories, you can look and say, well, have we started any work in these areas? Are we ready to start? Have we launched anything? You know, and so you can use this tool, and this is a very high level, you know, presentation on this. You can go to the website and learn more about how to use it and the benefits of using it, and look at some of the data that's been captured. But it's a great starting point to examine, where are we on this spectrum? Have we started anything? And what have we started? And what's the ROI? You know, what are the benefits? Is it working? Is it not working? So it's a way for you to sit down with your leadership teams and look at what are you doing in your organization, and how well is it working, and what are the opportunities that you have to change? Somewhat like a SWOT analysis, right? Our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You can even use that alongside a SWOT analysis as well. And so why share this? Because it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to examine your culture, your organization, your leadership, your vision, your values. I always say your vision and your value statements are only as good as they are adopted by the people in your organization. So I've done some listen and learn sessions over the past few weeks with some organizations, and we've had listen and learn sessions within the US and outside of the US. And for one organization, more than 50% of the employees did not know what the company's vision statement was. So you can have a very eloquent vision statement that's been well thought out and designed, but if employees don't know what it is and how it relates to what they do every day, then it's not an effective statement. Watching time here. And so Veronique is going to share with us a little bit about the organizational responsibility as it relates to this work. You're on mute, Veronique.
That's the statement of the century. we all have to learn to be better people. We know that, but our organizations also have to learn to be better organizations, better businesses, better nonprofits. And there are several ways to do that, as was mentioned before. There are many ways to do that. Some of them include internal conversations with staff, with board members, with volunteers. We have to encourage those uncomfortable conversations. That is one great way to grow as employees and as people, as individuals. I would also encourage organizations to have more formal conversations in the form of workshops. And having an external facilitator is always a good thing because it creates a safer place, safer space where people are more willing and more open to having those uncomfortable conversations and not agree with one another. Mentoring opportunities. I think it's just phenomenal what you can learn from a mentor, especially if that mentor is from a different culture. My mentors have been from across cultures. So they're not white people. They're not like me. They don't think like me. And that is one wonderful way to learn more about yourself and more about others. And I think we also have to be extremely aware of the fact that when we address strategies as organizations, we want to make sure that they're fair and that they're culturally appropriate. So in your strategic goals, you make sure that you address justice. When you plans, you keep that in mind. Policies, procedures, and structures. When you hire someone, make sure that in your hiring committee, you have people that represent a variety of thoughts and cultures, if possible. When you address retention policies, how do you retain your employees that are people of color? Are you doing that differently? Are you being sensitive to those differences? And when working on quantifying people's goals, you make sure that you address that with the staff. What do those goals look like? Are they fair to everyone? And those could lead to those internal conversations that we talked about before. And we sometimes have to disagree to move forward and make important decisions. There was something else that I wanted to mention, but I can't remember now. Oh yeah, and hiring decisions. We hear a lot about, we want to make sure that that person fits in. We want to make sure there's a good fit with the organization. Yes, but what does that mean? Does that mean that you want to hire someone who is like you, who thinks like you, who will do the job that you already do? Sometimes it's a great thing to hire someone who may be that person who will shake the status quo. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And there are many other things that you can do as an organization, and this is not the purpose of this particular workshop, but I wanted to go over a few of the activities that your organizations can do.
Thank you, Veronique. And I wanted to just build off of something that you said when you mentioned the word safety, because I think that is so important. These are tough conversations. When we start talking about our values, our belief systems, our convictions, all of these topics around diversity and inclusion can be very sensitive topics, and they can strike nerves in us, right? They can bring up things in us that can strike a variety of emotions. And so I think creating psychologically safe spaces, creating speak up cultures is very important. We have to give ourselves permission to listen, to understand, right? We're going to hear things that we may not agree with. All you have to do is catch one of the news reels, right? And you can see how difficult it is for people to hear differing opinions and to hear things that they don't agree with and that don't align with their values. But it doesn't mean that it's not an important opportunity to listen, right? You don't have to agree, but it's important on this journey to listen. So I think safety is very important. So we're talking about overcoming bias in the workplace, and this is a strategy that I created, and I share this in a variety of training programs, and it's the concept of ACT to disrupt bias, and it's around this acronym ACT: awareness, commitment, and teamwork. And I created this because there's oftentimes when I'm doing strategy work, you know, we're talking about leadership's responsibility, right? The people who have that additional responsibility in terms of running the organization and setting the tone and developing the strategies. But I wanted to be able to have conversations where everyone can be involved and engaged, because full employee engagement is so important, especially when you're talking about changing cultures, when you're talking about advancing and positive change. We need to have all hands on deck. And so this is something that everyone can do. It doesn't matter what your title is, what your job grade level, salary, where you sit in the organization. Everyone can act to disrupt bias. And so awareness is about this question: how will I increase my self-awareness of how my personal biases impact the people and environment around me? It's about me looking inward and saying, what can I do differently? How can I increase my self-awareness? How can I check my own biases? It's about commitment. How will I align my behavior and communication to model the value of diversity, equity, belonging, inclusion, and justice? Right? Again, what can I do differently? How can I increase my level of commitment? And then teamwork is how will I create or leverage opportunities to collaborate to make positive change within my business and community? It's about reaching across aisles, right? Even if you're in an organization and you work in department ABC, doesn't mean that there are not opportunities for you to collaborate with department XYZ, right? How can we reach outside of our immediate areas to leverage our skills, our experience, our passions, our interests, our desires? And so acting to disrupt bias is about going inward. It's about raising our self-awareness. It's about making a commitment, not to a facilitator in a training program, not to anybody else, making a commitment to yourself to show up differently if that's what you choose to do, if that's what you want. If you're here, but you want to be over here, what commitment are you going to make to shift and to move towards where you want to be? And that teamwork. This is an opportunity for us to all work together. And then I like to share some self-coaching questions, right? As a certified professional coach, I'm biased with coaching, and I think we all have an opportunity to hold ourselves accountable. What are my strengths and how can I leverage them? So much of our time can be spent on what we don't do well and trying to get better at that. But yet we have all of these strengths that we can stop and say, well, wait a minute, am I leveraging them fully? If I'm a great listener, how can I leverage my great listening skills in this space? Right? To advance diversity, equity, and inclusion. What can I commit to start doing differently today? Even as a result of this presentation, is there something that you picked up and you can say to yourself, okay, this is what I'm going to start doing differently today. And then how will I hold myself accountable? You know, do I need an accountability partner, or is it something that I can commit to and keep in front of me in terms of my own personal vision to hold myself accountable? And so this is one piece of an ongoing conversation, right? Hopefully there's something that you heard or saw in the presentation today that you can continue to build on. Maybe you're doing these things already, and it's an opportunity for you to go and do a check-in and say, okay, so how's this working? Or do I need to do something differently? And so I just encourage everyone, keep the conversation going. I know there's a lot of negativity, that energy that is, you know, influencing behavior and unfortunately hijacking conversations, but there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity to be positive and to be a part of positive change as well. So I am going to stop there and turn this back over to Heather, and we'll continue to move forward towards the panel discussion, right?
Yes, thank you, Annette and Veronique. That was an amazing presentation. I really appreciate your time and energy today. I made a couple of notes myself that potential future conversations could be organizational tactics for DEI, that slide that Veronique went over. And then also I noticed at the beginning, just like Veronique mentioned, examining our own implicit bias seemed really challenging in the survey poll. So I wonder if that could be a future sort of, personal workshop or conversation that we could have. So I made some notes about that. And I think those will give us a start moving forward, but I'm excited to see what you guys think as well. So right now I'm going to turn it over. Actually, I'm going to introduce, and Annette, I'm going to put the PowerPoint back up on my end. I actually have a couple of slides at the end. Let me get that real quick. Thanks for your patience. We have a few transitions today. Can you see the PowerPoint again? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. Let me zoom to the end here. We should have a couple of additional slides. Yeah, here we go. Have all our lovely faces on the screen. So the first person I'm going to introduce is Sharon Morris. She's with, she's the Community Reinvestment Officer with First Shore Federal Savings and Loan, one of our local banks that we know and love very much. Sharon works with both of our organizations, both of our host organizations, the United Way and the Community Foundation, as well as many other organizations in the community. She is a committee member here at the Foundation, Vice Chair of the Salvation Army, Secretary for Habitat for Humanity, Executive Committee for Wicomico Branch NAACP, Board Member for the Village of Hope, United Way, and John B. Parsons. I don't know how she had time to be with us today, but we're really excited to have her with us. And she is going to be introducing you to our moderator and our speakers for today's panel. So I'm going to turn it over to Sharon.
Thank you, Heather. Good afternoon to everybody. As the first person, Heather got to say a little bit more than we've written. These are very humble bios from our panelists today. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Donnie Waters from Maryland Capital Enterprises. Donnie writes that he's a concerned citizen and proven professional who is a community investor sharing time, talent, and treasure. Over the past many decades, Donnie has provided help to organizations across private, public, and social sectors. His role as a consultant has allowed him to be instrumental in ensuring that diversity, equity, and inclusion are not just moral imperatives, they are integral to a dual mission to help clients make substantial, lasting change. You have already been introduced to Annette P. Johnson, again, the founder and principal of AG Leads, LLC. Annette is an accomplished global professional development facilitator and certified leadership coach with 30 years experience designing and delivering educational programs for corporate, small business, nonprofit, and education sectors. Next is Sonya Whited, chemical engineer. Sonya studied chemical engineering at Rutgers and now directs retail product development at Perdue Farms. Sonya is a dedicated community volunteer and friend both of the United Way and Community Foundation. She's also passionate about volunteering services, among them Kindness Commissioner here in Salisbury. And Lili Leonard, SU President, SU Alumni President. Lili brings passion and dedication to her own chosen field of fundraising. A Salisbury and Frostburg State alumna, competitive athlete, and parent to both horses and pups. Lil can walk into any room and fill it with her good energy. She's a consummate dad joke lover and much to the enjoyment or chagrin of all of her friends. I'd like to introduce Mr. Donnie Waters again as the moderator for the afternoon.
Thanks, Sharon, very much. And thank you to the Community Foundation for and the United Way and everyone for including me in this very important gathering of minds and coming up with solutions so that we can create this better society. It's ongoing. I like the way, Annette, the way you started it off. What I will share real quickly, because we want to hear from the panel speakers, we have to overlay all of this with COVID-19, which really has to do with uncertainty. And COVID-19 has revealed or unveiled, taken the veneer off of our facade of how things are going along smoothly. And it really has revealed the deep disparities at every level in our society. And each one of you know personally, as well as societally, what's really going on. So as we move forward, I would just like for us to begin to look at inside each of ourselves, because there are only two ways you can get anything done. Either you do it by yourself or you do it with a team, and a team is either 2, 3, or more people, but there's only two ways to work. So it's very important that each individual begin to, as Annette said, self-assess, be aware, and we all have room for adjustments. So let's move forward. Ladies, are you ready? So let's have some fun, and hopefully it'll be insightful for all that are attending. So we'll start with number one. What is the best piece of advice that your mentor or mentors have given you concerning workplace decisions and interactions? And Annette, I see you have, you want to start that one off? You're muted.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yes, so I have a mentor that I met early in my career at the firm that I worked for, and we're still connected to this day. And I still consider her to be a mentor. She was an executive at the firm, and I knew her from a distance, and then I had the opportunity to work for her. And one of the best pieces of advice, a couple of things that she would say to me, and one is to not be reactive, right, in interactions, and to allow yourself time to pause. I still use that terminology of I know how to hit the pause button, right, to pause. And because sometimes, and especially in this space, the D&I space, right, because there's so much sensitivity, is to allow yourself time to pause and digest and really give yourself an opportunity to understand a person's point of view and perspective, and to not always take things personally and to react so quickly. And so that's something that I've taken with me throughout my journey and my professional life and personal life, is to not be so reactive, and to really, listen to understand, try to understand another person's point of view. And that helps you in a lot of ways to make informed decisions, to not be reactive, to not take things personal. So it can help in a lot of different ways.
Very good advice. Sonya, would you like to chime in terms of what is the best advice you have received?
I totally agree with Annette, and something that I've said actually publicly before in another kind of forum for the chamber when we were talking about things for diversity, is the way that I look at it at work is, so I work in R&D, on the R&D side. There's so many different departments here in Perdue and any company. So you have a decision that needs to be made. You want to get different viewpoints. If it's a company-wide decision, you want to have the different viewpoints from the different people in the company. I feel like that's the same thing with some life, community, decisions as well. You might have your viewpoint, and you're coming from it from what you know and what your awareness is. But somebody else, you have that conversation with somebody else, doesn't necessarily mean a different gender. It's also just you talk about diversity of thought. It's a buzzword, but it's true. You don't want somebody, as Veronique has stated before, that's thinking exactly like you, because that's the way that you're going to get to the most informed decision. So that's something that actually was instilled in me ever, since I was a little person. So, and that's something that I truly believe in.
Dr. Leonard.
The
There you
theme of my life for the last year has been you're muted, and then I can't find the unmute button. So thank you, Donnie. You know, best piece of advice I've ever received actually goes to, you know, a question that's going to be posed a little bit later by you, Donnie, which is, I think it kind of overlaps. You know, we work with people, with human beings. I think that's so important as somebody who manages people, as a leader within my organization, as a colleague. You know, everybody comes to the workplace with a different set of life experiences. And, you know, if you think about employees as employees, there's always going to be a disconnect there. You know, they're absolutely people first. And I really do think that that goes a long way. I try to utilize that in all of my interactions. I try to step outside of my own team. So I work at AOPA, which is a general aviation membership organization. So when you think of, you know, little Cessna airplanes and kind of private pilots, that's who we represent. And that's, we have more than 300,000 members. So naturally we have a pretty large organization. We've got about 250 staff. Well, I work for the foundation team, which is the philanthropic arm of the organization. We only represent 9 staff. So there's 241 people that I don't work with day to day. And I make it a point to step outside of my team of 9 and interact with those people, as human beings. And just through that lens, I have learned so much about, you know, and it was mentioned in the presentation, Annette, I thought it was terrific. You just kind of don't know what you don't know. You know, I only come to life with my own lens of my own experience. I don't know Sonya's life, you know, I don't know Donnie's life, and only they know their life. So if you approach them as human beings and people and treat them with dignity and respect and decency, you're going to learn something about yourself, and it's going to change your worldview as well. So, you know, it's a pretty simple rule. It's just people first. And it really applies to pretty much everything that I do every day.
Thank you, ladies, so much, and leave your mics unmuted.
Got it. Okay, well, I'm gonna say, so Heather mentioned in the bio, thank you, Heather, that I have some pups. They've been quiet all morning, and I assure you,
that's not going to last.
I'm saying if I'm unmuted, there's a 95% chance they're going to start barking. So you've been warned.
I would just like very quickly, and I would ask each one of you for a short response. I'd like to drill down a little bit on that one question. It's okay in terms of people giving you advice, but what I'm interested in, and I think it would be advantageous for the group to hear. So you're dealing with a lot of high level people making big time decisions. And certainly everybody comes to the table believing that they better know. So how do you do this thing? I talk about mutual collaboration, and you're talking about inclusion, right? So inclusion has a power element, which means you're not only at the table, but it's weighted and you're going to be heard, and maybe even your weight might be the winning weight in the end of the day. So how do you navigate working with these different personalities and negating your bias or your perspective necessarily? Does that make, you getting what I'm asking?
Rephrase that again, please.
How do you navigate working with very bright, brilliant, well-intentioned individuals, yet who may have a different perspective than you do? So how do you navigate coming up with one solution for the entire group and getting buy-in from everybody?
Well, I mean, I don't know that, you know, one solution. I don't know that the formula for one solution. I feel like every conversation that I'm a part of, there are multiple solutions that are needed. But I will say, I think it goes back to the listening to understand. I think it's two things. I think it's one, being confident and comfortable. So when you said, you know, these brilliant, smart people, I think it's important for you to show up knowing that about yourself. That you are brilliant, you are smart, and that you're bringing something to this conversation or to this experience that has value. So I think it's showing up with that level of confidence. And I say that because I didn't always have that. right? I worked with a lot of senior level people throughout a predominantly white organization that were highly educated. And so I did not always show up with my confidence being, you know, at a certain level. And so I think it's important to know that when you're invited to the table, when you have an opportunity to be at the table, that you have every right to be there, and that your value that you bring may not look like everybody else's. You may not have the same level of education. You may have a different title, but you have a voice and you have an experience. And so be comfortable sharing that.
And I would say, I would definitely agree with that. And my LinkedIn hashtag, because there's many more, and Annette says this many, many times, but we had an exercise where they're like, come up with your, you know, you have your elevator speech, so come up with a hashtag that describes you. You might have one that's more Facebook or something else appropriate, like, you know, party all the time or something like that. But my LinkedIn one is authentic collaborator. And so for me, it is coming with your confidence, knowing that you belong at the table, right? So there's that piece, but also that you're willing to listen, not even willing, but you want to listen. Like going back to even what we talked about before, I think that that's really, really important. People do come in their lens, something that Lili said, they do come with their lens. I want to hear that lens so that we can get to the best solution. So I agree with you, Annette, that it's not just necessarily one solution, but sometimes you have to come to one solution, but you need to take all those pieces together to formulate the solution. Like your solution that you thought or my solution that I thought and my lens is not the ultimate solution. We need to tailor that, take everybody's input to come up with what that solution is that we would, you know, possibly move forward with and feel confident that that's our best solution by taking different points of view.
Yeah.
Dr. Leonard, you had anything you want to add?
I have some feelings about this, people. So, you know, I'm going to say a couple things here. The first thing is I'm 32 years old. Okay.
Good.
I've done all right in my career so far. You know, I'm still gainfully employed. It's a true miracle. Every day I joke with my colleagues that when I swipe in and the card still works, I'm like, wow, that's terrific. I'd live to see another day. But in all seriousness, I do take my job very seriously, and I take consensus building very seriously as well. That said, I'm almost always one of the youngest leaders at the table. And there's a serious imposter syndrome that comes with that. So, you know, Annette, when you say like, know that you belong there, you really need to internalize that message. And, you know, what I try to do first and foremost, and I've observed through, you know, I've worked at several organizations of varying sizes, and I think that senior leaders perhaps have the best of intentions as they're getting to that role. And once they get up there, there's a different set of responsibilities or a different worldview, and you kind of lose touch of the value of folks, you know, further down the food chain without trying to, you know, oversimplify this. So when I'm sitting at this table, I consider myself kind of in that middle. You know, I have this seat, but I also have access to, you know, what are the true implications of decision making at the top. So I sit at that table as trying to represent all of those other people that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, Donnie, that, you know, interact with people as people and value them and be authentic. And, you know, you can't just fake it and go talk with people, make connections. You genuinely have to, you know, understand that they bring something really important, and that you work for the same organization, you're on the same team. So, you know, trying to think about that as I'm at these decision-making tables often unearths a blind spot that we may not have otherwise considered. You know, what is the implication of making a decision up here? How is that going to impact, you know, our member services representatives who are going to have to field the phone calls from 10 or 20,000 members? So, you know, I think the imposter syndrome is real. Just know that you belong. And I'm just going to say this, and it might not be a super popular thing to say. There are people at the highest levels who, you know, may be there, but may not necessarily belong there. So, you know, don't be afraid to, you know, say, look, I hate to tell you, but, you know, we should approach it this way, or, you know, try it a different way. Don't think that just because somebody's a senior leader or C-suite, you know, level person, that they somehow have it all figured out. And don't be afraid to, challenge that status quo, because that's truly the only way that things substantively change. And you may be seen as a pariah, and you may be seen as somebody, I'm a woman. And so, something that I would say comes across as bossy, but if a male says it, it might be seen as an assertive leader, right? So don't be afraid to be unpopular in those scenarios, because that's truly the only way that you can affect change.
Okay, so Dr. Leonard, you dropped a whole lot of nuggets there that could take us.
I had feelings about it. I tried to warn you.
Listen, it could take us down a whole nother conversation, but there's one thing that I just want to piggyback off of real quick. It brought up something that my mentor also shared with me, is when you do get access and the door opens and you do have a seat at the table, to not go ill-informed. And one of the things that she taught me was to always know who you're sitting at the table with.
There you go.
And so that's a big part of this discussion too, is our own cultural competency and understanding and knowing something about the people that we are at the table with and that we're interacting with.
100%. Couldn't agree more.
And also, I just wanted to say that, Lili, you had a lot of fabulous points.
Yes.
The other thing, though, that I believe, and possibly because I have this, I feel like I have this that we have this at Perdue, that a lot of those senior leaders, people are scared to say something different. But if you are informed, not just of who they are, but also of the topic, because sometimes you are more informed on the topic than they are, because they are at 100 million thousand view, and you are, and we are at a different level, and so we might know more about the topic. They'll actually, you come with an informed decision, and it's not confrontational, it's authentic. That's why I love that word. They'll listen. A lot of people are just kind of scared of that, just to say something that, that is truly heartfelt and that you're knowledgeable about. But a lot of them will listen, and just people are just kind of scared to even just say anything. So.
Very good, ladies, and that's part of what I wanted to bring out is the real, because life and also working in an organization is kind of messy. It's real work, and you have to use the tools that are available to you, and you got to be thinking, but you also have a heart, be compassionate, and know that everybody's part of your team. And at the end of the day, there will be an outcome, and it might be that one outcome for this particular moment, but it evolves, because organizations are constantly learning. Thanks so much. So we have the question of networking. Everybody talks about networking and how important it is. So what have you learned about effective decision-making and with regards to why networking is so important? Sonya, you want to start with that one?
Well, some of the things that, Veronique and Annette talked about, and then that we all know when we talk about just the diversity piece, it's getting to know different people, right? So in terms of the importance of networking, or I'll just take it from the standpoint of why networking is important to me. It's exciting to learn about different cultures. It's exciting to learn about different people that you might not know about. I mean, you gain your own personal knowledge, but again, different perspectives that can help you make the best informed decision. And so having that kind of mindset, a lot of people, people like to kind of talk about themselves. We don't want to hear like a 2-hour dissertation, preferably, but just in a network setting or in a work setting, organization setting, honestly, mostly any kind of setting, so if they're sitting there eating dinner or something like that, people are just very, very open. People will say hi, welcome, or give a little bit, of information about themselves. And I think, again, it's something that it opens for future relationships, right? Or it opens for future possibilities, whether it's being on a panel or, something that could help you with the organization or personally. But it also is something that is fulfilling for yourself. You might not realize it. And some people that are, I don't like to use introverted, or more kind of internal and are not necessarily comfortable talking to people, you can just kind of take the deep breath, do the breathing exercises and do it. It's not as hard like once you've done it. Sometimes the setup is difficult, but I think that it's, and actually I've had these conversations with some people that are very, 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 that really, really don't like to speak to people. After it's done, or after they've had that interaction, they're definitely happy with it. It's just working up to it. So I don't know if that specifically answers your question, but networking is extremely important to me.
You know, there's always more than one way to answer the question, right?
But you know, I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, if there was a secret sauce to overcoming workplace bias, I would say networking could potentially be it. Because what it does is give you an opportunity to meet people, to learn about different aspects of your community, your workplace, etc. But it opens the door for you to get to meet somebody and learn something new about a different culture, a different perspective, a different experience. And so I know traditionally networking has, or at least from where I came from, you know, growing up in corporate America, networking was always about getting ahead. You want to prepare for that next level, that next promotion. And it's important for you to have this amazing network. But I think it's even more important in this space that we're talking about right now, because it's an opportunity for you to grow and get to know about people who don't look like you, don't sound like you, are not from where you're from, have different values, beliefs, etc.
Preach, preach. Can I just say that when we were prepping for this, and I know y'all probably think I'm just winging it, but I'm not, I promise. So,
don't give away the secrets.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm winging it, totally winging it. You think of networking, and when I think of that term, Annette, I think of kind of like, what you mentioned, like corporate, like, here, let me hand you my business card at this conference with terrible coffee, and that's not how I think about, I actually really prefer to use the term relationship building rather than networking, because the connotation to me, I don't connect those dots in my head. Something that I think is really, really important that's worked well for me. And again, always coming to this authentically. I just really love people. So when you start there, it's, I think, a little bit easier. Don't only interact with people outside of your direct team when you need something or want something, right? Because then what happens is you think you're networking with them and they're thinking, oh man, here comes Lili. What does she want now? Because she only comes around when she needs this article or when she's on a deadline or whatever. Don't be that person. Truly get to know people, because a lot of the growth conversations that I've had throughout workplaces I've been at and within my cohorts and classmates, they don't happen in a work interaction. They happen, after the, hey, how's it going? How's this project going? XYZ. Hey, how's your weekend? Right? Or, hey, how's your summer going? How are your kids? That's where you really start to learn about other people's life experiences. It's that next step. It's not within that sort of confine of the workplace. So, when we think of networking, try to not think about it in the more traditional sense that you may be accustomed to, or at least that I'm accustomed to when I think of that term. Interact with people when you think about them. Something that I've started to do is, with COVID, we're all on Microsoft Teams, and it took me, a year to figure out how to use Microsoft Teams, but here we are. But you can chat with everyone in the organization. You just type their last name in and it populates. And literally, if I happen to be thinking about somebody who maybe works in IT, or I'm just, I wonder I'll just shoot them a note. Hey, I'm thinking about you. What's going on? How many times a day do you think about somebody? Oh, I should connect with them. Oh, I haven't talked to them in a while. Just do it. It only takes 30 seconds, and that is that genuine relationship building and nurturing without that kind of negative connotation.
And I think that, I'm sorry, just really quick to what Lili said in terms of networking, that's the way I think that I look at it, is what you were talking about. I was about to click on here, being the way that I am, and type up what does networking mean? Because I'm thinking about, like the computer network and things like that. I think that the word has a connotation when we say it, but I think the true meaning of it is those connections. And so the connections is you have to have that initial discussion, that initial contact to really make those connections. But it's more than, I guess the way to look at it is more than it's just that initial contact, right? From that, you can build upon that. I love what you said, and it's very, very true. Just to give a shout out, a quick hi to somebody, it takes nothing with, like you said, Teams on a text. You have that internal I am, and I know that somebody does pop into mind, and that's something that's very, very important, because if there is, and it's almost like an insurance in terms of if there happens to be a time that you need something, and this has happened definitely to me, and you need something and it is not inside of any kind of my daily work at all, and you need something immediately, that person that you reach out to genuinely just to check on them, or just shoot the breeze or whatever, is a person that will be there quicker than you even thought about to help you out with something. Because they understand that it's something that you actually need. I'm not just calling you because, I call you once a year because I need something from you.
Right.
What is also an interesting and a valuable aspect of this whole networking piece has to do with presenting yourself to other people who may not know you. And then in that vacuum, people will put anything in there, and then that's where perception goes in. So if you're a little more forward and inviting and just being a human being, it gives another person the opportunity to form a more realistic idea or profile of who you are and what you represent. But I want to throw this out here. We got a question that says, is there any advice to us not touchy-feeling people? Peopling is important, but very challenging for us to think, to do, and actually to do. And so this individual is, do you have any kind of advice, a plan of action?
Well,
Thanks for bringing that up, Donnie.
Oh yeah, well, this is going to be a real interaction. It's just not about rushing through this.
I'm sure we're half and half in this room, half outgoing and half introverted people. So,
well, I think something Dr. Leonard said, I'd like to build off of in response to this question. And, you talked about, not just reaching out to people when you need something. And so I think there's a flip side to that too. I think you can be a solution for people. That's a part of networking as well. And so in response to this particular question, that could be something that can help for people who are more introverted, and this feels kind of like too touchy-feely, and they're just not the type of person that is going to just reach out to someone just to reach out, is to make it more goal or more purpose oriented, right? And so there might be an opportunity where you have information or you have something that you can share with someone that is a part of a solution. And so now you're not looking for anything, but you're actually helping. You're actually bringing something that could be a part of solving a problem, or maybe just sharing information or a best practice. And it can kind of take that discomfort away because it's centered around something versus I'm just doing this to be doing it.
And if I can add, for Becca, I think what a terrific question. And nobody on this phone call is going to believe me, but I'm actually an introvert. I know you're not going to believe me, but
I do believe you.
You do? Thank you, Donnie. Love you, man. Yeah. I love people, and I also love solitude and having time to recharge myself. So I think I kind of see both sides of that. And something that I think more extroverted folks can do is you have to be able to read the room. You have to be able to read folks. So in a in a workplace interaction, I suppose I would be considered more extroverted, but I also know kind of when to draw that back and when to meet people where they are. You know, I work with a lot of people who are generally more, I would consider to be introverted. They're a little more quiet. They're great. They bring so much to the table, because if you have 10 extroverts at a table squawking, you're not going to get very far. You know, I mean, there's value in people who are kind of more observant and sitting back and kind of taking, you know, taking an assessment before they speak or if they speak. And I think it's kind of our responsibility as people who are more outward facing to kind of meet them where they are. I would say for you, you know, find some shared interest. I know this might sound really silly. We're, you know, mentioned in my bio that I had 2 dogs, and I'll just randomly send a picture of my dogs, like something cute that they're doing or whatever. I'll put it in the Teams chat and send it to a couple of my more introverted colleagues, and because I know that they have a dog too, you know, or I know that they are watching March Madness, and I'll say, oh my gosh, I can't believe that Gonzaga game, which was actually insane if y'all watched it. Wild finish. But you know, just those small nuggets, it might take a little bit more work, but you can really establish a meaningful connection with people without kind of forcing them to, you know, try to find something that you might have in common with them. And more often than not, they're really pumped about it. They're really excited to connect about something that's valuable to them outside of the workplace. Very few people are going to say, you know what, I just really don't want to talk to you because I'm here to go 9 to 5.
Right.
And if they do, that's fine. Like, not everyone's workplace is like their forever job or their dream. You know, sometimes people are just there to put the time in, and like, that's great. You know what, if you do a great job and if you assign life value outside of your workspace, that's awesome. You know, but more often than not, in my experience, I found, you know, finding a small way to connect with people and not even having to go anywhere beyond that does go a long way.
There's a small connection, but there's also what Annette said about being very, very specific, because I'm like you, Lili, and I've taken the Myers-Briggs countless times, but as I get older, I get more introverted, right? And so, but introverted is where you get your energy from. I'm an only child though. And so I but I've also taken one of these other tests, and what it actually said that really fits me perfectly, I think. Introvert, that's why I don't like to necessarily use it, because that's where you get your energy from, it's internal, but the terminology was selectively social. I can be as social as you want to be, but I need to be by myself sometimes. I do not need to see another person. I'm good. Like, and so people, I think that people don't necessarily see that side of people as well, but a way to try and bridge that is like the difference between mentoring, like overall mentoring, and even coaching. If there's something specific I want, or is specific that is needed, a specific problem, and I know that the person that barely says a word over here, but they're at the company, or they're in the organization for a reason. They belong at the table, okay? And I know that skill set. If you ask a pointed question, maybe not necessarily in front of the whole room or group of people, but you ask them a pointed question, you're probably going to get a very, very informed answer. And if they don't want to speak up for themselves, or they're not comfortable with it, make sure you acknowledge where you got that information from, and give them their, you know, the credit that they deserve as well. So there's ways to, I think that there's ways to do it, even if you're not the one to reach out, whether it's sponsors, you know, an official word for it, but a one-off sponsor or something pointed I think Annette has some really, really good suggestions on how to manage that, actually for all of us, whether you're extroverted, introverted, selectively social, whatever that is.
So I would conclude this one by just saying, I think all of us at one point in life gravitated more toward the term introvert, okay? Which means you're not as outward. But I would share with you, here's what should be really held on to, is that we're all human beings. And at different points, depending on the topic or whatever's going on, we may be more into that, more willing to expose or share who we are. But I believe at all times, you're an adult, you're prepared, be your authentic self, and know that you're bringing value to the situation. And I think if you hold on to that, you know, you just pick and choose and see where you can get in to add value. So at the end of the day, that's what it really boils down. So ladies, COVID-19 arrived last year and it was unannounced. Nobody was prepared for it, were they? Because this question has to do with how do you exercise good judgment during challenging situations? And I think COVID-19 overlaid over that is a good one because it's a lot of nuances to it. So given a challenging situations, how do you individually exercise good judgment in a challenging situation? And do you have a methodology, a model, or so forth? Oh,
A lot of deep breaths.
I'll pick, let me pick Dr. Leonard. You start off this
Oh,
time.
geez, I was trying to be quiet. Yeah, you know, I have many people who report to me. I think hierarchy is just ridiculous, but anyway, it is, you know, I'm responsible for them and making sure that they have what they need to be successful. And, you know, I think the best way to exercise good judgment is to not make assumptions about what people are experiencing, you know. I have colleagues who have young children. I have colleagues who have, you know, pre-existing health conditions that they happen to have disclosed to me. You know, I have colleagues that are, you know, maybe going through relationship challenges or a primary caregiver to their elderly parent, or, you know, you just don't know. You don't know what you don't know what people are going through. You know, we happen to work in a place, and I think COVID-19 for many of you on the line has proven that we're able to work remotely with little to no disruption for the majority of our jobs. Do you know how far it goes to just trust your colleagues to, you know, self-regulate? I mean, you know, I'm not a clock watcher. I don't care. I really, you know, you earned your paid time off, so you take it when you feel like you need to take it. You don't have to ask me, you just tell me. And, you know, I think that overall, I think collectively my judgment's pretty good. Again, because I'm looking at them as human beings and family members first. You know, yes, I get to interact with them for 7.5, 8 hours per day. But they have families, they have obligations, they have things going on in their life. So be a little bit forgiving, especially in these times. Like if you're able to do that, do it. It goes a really long way. So, you know, you just don't know, you don't know what people are experiencing. I think that's the best way that I've been able to exercise good judgment, just not make assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon me, Miss Annette. I'm the one with the muted mic. Would you want to add to that?
Who?
I'm asking, yeah, would you like to add anything?
Oh, I don't know that there's anything to answer. I think that's so powerful about the assumption piece.
That's
you
fine.
know, it's not making assumptions, because that takes us down so many different paths that can lead us further away from exercising good judgment versus bringing us closer to exercising good judgment, you know? So I think being really careful with assumptions, and I think it goes back to, again, like being informed. You know, you don't always have to respond in the moment. You know, sometimes you can step away, hit the pause button, you know, do some deeper diving before you respond. And I've always been the type of person where I feel like I've got to respond in the moment. You know, even as a parent, like my daughters are adults and they still say to me, now just think about this. That's how the conversation starts. Mom, I gotta share something with you, but I want you to just think about it. Because
you trained them well.
My nature is to jump in, to respond, to resolve. And so I think, along with the assumption, giving yourself permission to step back, pause, and make sure that you are getting all the information that you need.
So, and it doesn't that feed into your thing about self-awareness and
Yeah.
self-editing?
Yeah.
self-editing.
Yeah, and it also feeds into, when I was saying deep breaths before, like I was smiling when I said it, that's kind of what I meant, is that to take that deep breath and when you do that, instead of responding necessarily in the moment, which was a very classic Sonya move growing up, you take the time to realize, do you know about the whole situation? Do you know what they're going through right now? Like, before you respond and do whatever that response was, it doesn't always have to even necessarily be negative, but you still need to understand the situation, right? Understand that what you see in front of you is not necessarily the whole picture. They might have had 18 other emails and someone just set them off, right? And so just understand that, or there might be more background above it. This might be also the 18th time that I answered this question and I'm beyond frustrated. You know, so getting a little bit more context is very, very important, but you have to take that, I say deep breath, but take the moment, whatever it is. And sometimes if there is the immediate response, and mine is, because I like to do the immediate response too, I'll get back to you whether it's tomorrow or next. Like, that's my immediate response. My immediate response is I'm going to get back to you later because I'm gonna need a minute.
So I think you guys answered this next one. So I'm gonna skip down to what are the benefits of having more diversity in leadership roles, specifically people of color, LGBTQIA plus, people with disabilities, and women. Dr. Anderson, you want to lead off with that? Oh. Dr. Anderson? I'm sorry, Dr. Leonard. I apologize. I was on another web Zoom meeting, evidently.
And I was like scanning the names, and I'm like, oh,
Dr. Anderson, we did not this.
I was on another Zoom meeting, evidently. Well, look, here's an important fact. You should be able to laugh at yourself.
Oh, the only way to go. The only way to go. Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of, we've been talking about it for an hour and a half. I mean, everybody comes to life with different experiences, you know. I have come, I only have walked in my shoes, you know, and when we talk about implicit and unconscious bias, we all have it. Every single one of us, we all have it, because nobody has lived the experience that we have lived, and vice versa, you know. So I think it's just so important to represent, to have people at the table who come from a different background, who have a different experience. You know, I don't know that we need to really belabor the point any more than that. But, you know, language matters as well. You know, as an out gay person, you know, it's really interesting that when you start to point things out that may have already been an assumption, and I think we've really made an incredible amount of progress over the last couple of years with this, with regard to, you know, pronouns, and people put that in their email signatures now, which is just terrific. But, you know, prior to that, you know, assuming, you know, going to HR and onboarding and, you know, being asked the question, well, is your husband going to be on your insurance? And it's like, nope, because he's not a husband. I'll give you one more guess, you know. And so when you start to think about those, you know, those small things, and, you know, could that be seen as a microaggression? I don't know. It depends on how you interpret it. It depends on the context and, you know, the intent, and there's a lot of different factors there. But, you know, once you kind of course correct folks on that, you change their perspective forever. So, you know, from that point on, you know, they're going to say spouse, or will there be anyone else on your health insurance policy, or something like that. And that's how you're able to move the needle and change cultures. So you can't do that without having, you know, representation at that table. And it is important to actively seek that out.
Yeah. And, you know, it's amazing that here we are in 2021, and there are still people who approach things from that perspective. I mean, we closed on our house in 2017, and I was working with a female realtor who almost lost our sale, our business, because I was doing this from New Jersey, and there were times where I had to come down and my husband couldn't come down, and she didn't want to do business without the two of us being together. Like, we both had to go see the house because I don't know why. And I finally said to her, if that's what this sale is contingent upon, then I need to work with a different realtor.
Right.
Because are you kidding me? Like, that can't be a policy of your office, of your real estate firm. It just can't be.
Right. And that's something interesting too. Like, the workplace is evolving rapidly. Okay. I am not old enough to have experienced it in its sort of, worst form. But at this point, and Annette, I think one of your slides pointed it out really eloquently, is it a good business practice or is it the right thing to do? Well, guess what? It's both. So if you're not doing it, you're missing out on high quality people, because if we are not attempting to mirror the population within our workplace until those things are commensurate, like there's room to grow, and we're not doing it right just yet. So, you're going to lose that talent, especially now where I suspect the workplace is not going to look the same after COVID. There's going to be an opportunity to be remote. There's going to be an opportunity to telework. There's going to be, flexibility in that. So guess what? These talented people that may have been geographically bound 5 days a week no longer are. So if they don't feel like they're working with people who represent them and people who make them better and people who push them and make them think about different things, then they're going to go to the next organization, and you just lost a huge opportunity. So, putting that out there as well. And this is tough for my organization. Where I work is very upper middle class white male, very, okay. General aviation is an inherently privileged activity. If you have the resources to rent an aircraft, buy an aircraft, to spend $10,000 to $15,000 to become a licensed pilot, then you are already in a different place in your life. So, sometimes it's really frustrating to be in that space. But I remember that this is where I'm going to make the greatest impact on shifting the culture, not only within my organization of 250 people, but outside, representing general aviation and saying, guess what? There are gay pilots, there are pilots of color, there are female pilots. And we can actually move the needle, and it's not the easiest work, but it's important work.
Yeah.
And like you said, though, for whatever organization, I don't say personally, but definitely organization and workplace, you want the best talent. And so and the best talent is the myriad of people. It should be representative of your community, but it is a myriad of people. It's not one type of person, even if the industry, and the poultry industry is so you said middle class or middle age or older white males primarily, right? From the gamut for Perdue, for example. But number one, again, for the talent pool of what we're looking at, and not just talking about the plants themselves, you need to look at the whole pool. And so with some of these things with biases and, going back to lack of diversity, you're not looking at the entire pool. You want the best people in those jobs. And then the other thing is, it does help, especially in these younger generations. And I hate to admit that I'm getting old, but this is a big half-century birthday coming up for me. But I have a lot of friends and a lot of coworkers that are younger, and they're looking at the best talent. Like, we're not you don't want to see I'm only looking at half the pool or 25% of the pool. Like, that's not okay. There's nothing okay about that. So aside from COVID making these changes and what you were just saying geographically, it's the world that we're living in right now. You need to look at the entire pool, or else you're going to lose talent that might not have been considered in the racially diverse pool, but that's not acceptable anymore. So we gotta change with the times too.
And you know, ageism is one of those areas that doesn't get a lot of attention in the DE&I space, right? We're talking about usually talking about women, we're talking about gender or people of color, or LGBTQ community. Ageism is kind of like it's a huge impact, but it doesn't get a lot of attention.
It was on that wheel. I love that wheel. That wheel was very impactful, and you saw that the age was there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and that really lends itself into the whole issue about biases and who's relevant, who can add value to the organization. I will just add real briefly, so you can move on to the next question. I've been involved in at least 4 different high-level corporate executive management training programs. And what I saw is there's an intentionality about what the corporation or the organization does in terms of developing talent. And that's to me, that would be a key part of how we move forward in terms of making recommendations and advising people. It's not just about diversity, but providing a mechanism to develop talent and nurture talent. Mm-hmm. So that being said, what are some best practices, ladies, that nonprofit organizations can incorporate to diversify their leadership teams? Sonya and Annette, real quickly. And we'll start with you,
Yeah,
Sonya.
I know we're 142. So some things there is the first thing. So you know what? I'm going to take this time to talk about something. Hopefully that people will be able to see in the next couple of weeks. That'll be coming out in the Salisbury Independent of something that we're working on. I truly believe that people hire, especially nonprofits, but also businesses, but we'll talk about nonprofits, and we'll talk about specifically on boards, but this is staff too. You hire or you recommend who you know, okay? That's the case, right? So in a lot of communities, and we'll call it the majority communities or just in the past, you know who you know. Well, this is still the South. I grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up in one of the towns that willingly integrated first, right? So I grew up around all kind of people since I was, again, a little person. And so I haven't really had the issues with that. But this is the South. We're still in the South. And there are some things where it's segregation, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just who you know. So in this experience, getting to know some people that are outside of your community or outside of your circle is really, really important. And sometimes it is like we need to bring that to the community because just not necessarily maybe exposed to them. Okay, so in the case here, working at Perdue, and again, kind of because of my background, I'll talk to whomever, and I've gotten on some of these boards just because of people knowing me and being recommended. So if my sorority sister, who was principal of Snow Hill High School, but is not in that circle, and people aren't necessarily aware of her, who's going to have her on a board or call her up because they just don't know her. So my thing is just being aware and sometimes that's on I'll say my community. I'm taking it on myself, is I'm gonna give you potential, not even candidates, but people to extend in your circle and your network. And so then when you're looking for that staff person, that board person, that you have more people to choose from that look a little different and that aren't the same 7 people that are on 18 boards. So I mean that's my personal way of trying to answer that question.
That real briefly.
Yeah, so my brief response will be, first, let's understand, that recruiting is different from referral, right? So referral leads to one-on-one hiring. It is not a recruiting practice. Someone refers someone to you and you hire them. Recruiting requires a strategy. Mm-hmm. It requires you to think about, what are the sources within a 3 to 5 mile radius from my company or my organization? Are there any HBCUs in the immediate area. So there's a difference between referral and recruiting. And I would encourage people to do more recruiting. Put the money around some recruiting strategies, work with organizations, different organizations and universities throughout your community, and stop the referral practice. That works sometimes, but you can't use a referral practice as a recruiting strategy. They're two very different things. And they're gonna get you two different results. The referral process is gonna get you people who look like you and that you're comfortable with, and recruiting is gonna be more strategic to focus on talent.
Okay, so we move into the second phase of this in panel discussion. Claire, I guess I turn it over to you. Is that right?
Yes. Thank
Okay.
you so
Thank
much.
you, Donnie. Thank you,
Quite welcome.
panelists.
Thanks, Donnie.
Thanks,
Let
Donnie.
me put up one
And
slide real quick.
Tell Dr. Anderson just to take it easy right now.
Dr. Anderson, settle down. Hold on. They're behind me. All right. They're good. They're good. I kicked them out.
Oh my God.
Can you see that, Claire?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
thank you. So I think we do have a little bit of time in case any of our audience has any questions, either related to the presentation on implicit bias or the great panel discussion that we just had. And certainly any comments are welcome as well as questions. So if you have any observations or experiences that you wanted to share, please don't be shy and speak up. We'd be happy to take those. And so I did see something pop up in the chat about, yes, we are recording, and so we'll be able to share that out to our participants. So yeah, definitely chime in as we move forward here in our closing remarks, if you would like to share. So we just wanted to do another thank you for the whole team that put this together. So of course we have our partners at Community Foundation, Veronique and Heather and Lauren, our great presenters on implicit bias, Veronique again, and Annette, and our panelists, Sonya, Lili, and Donnie as our moderator, and Sharon as well. So not only did this whole team, spend the afternoon with us, they also invested a lot of time and energy and expertise in planning this to help guide us and get us to where we are. Heather's got the slide up for us here where you can look into the events at Community Foundation and at United Way that are upcoming. And we just wanted to re-emphasize, as Heather remarked in the opening of this, this is just the first of one conversation on this really important topic related to diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging and justice, as we learned earlier. And we would love to see to put on more of these programs with you, with our community of nonprofits and the larger community going forward. And so we are going to be reaching out to all of our attendees and participants with a survey in the coming week to get your feedback about what you thought about the series we put together and what you would like to see as we move forward. We really want to be able to offer education and opportunities for discussion that are relevant to you and that will be helpful in your organization. So we want to gather that information so that we can provide that programming for you. So again, thank you. Heather, did you have any closing remarks that you would like to add?
No, I would just be saying exactly what you said, Claire. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, this was wonderful. It was educational, it was enlightening, and it was also a lot of fun.
It was
Well,
a lot of fun.
give yourselves a applause as well, because you created this opportunity and you used this platform to help continue this conversation and to raise awareness. And so you've got to give yourselves a hand. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this, because I learn too. When I participate in things like this, I always walk away with nuggets. Thank you, Dr. Leonard, for all the nuggets you're leaving with me today.
Wait, I was just going to say the same thing to you. Listen.
But see, that's what happens. You start nugget dropping and everybody learns from that, right?
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep, we did all learn. I do want to let you know that it takes a couple of days for our very slow Zoom account to make a recording available to me. So you may not get the follow-up email until Friday. but I will get it out to you as soon as that recording becomes available. We'll send a PowerPoint as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Terrific.
everyone.
I hope you
Thank
have
you,
a wonderful
everybody.
day.
Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Take care.
Enjoy. Bye.